We're here with Anita Glesta at the National Theatre to talk about her projection, WATERSHED. Can you explain a bit about the concept behind WATERSHED and how the piece came about?
Sure. I'm going to go back a few years to 2009 to actually the COP15 conference, where I was invited to do work by Artport Video Group and in collaboration with the United Nations about how women in the third world are affected by climate change. And of course that's a huge task, and I answered to that fairly symbolically. By having my work in this summit, which was actually not a very good summit, I sadly learned more about what wasn't happening in the world politically with climate change than I had expected. And that really shifted even more already a practice that I have that has been largely working in the public and largely interactive into thinking about where I was positioned as a New Yorker. And so coming back to New York, I began to think about the island of Manhattan actually floating in the mouth of the ocean and our vulnerability, this is 2009, to the rising of the tides. And then around a year later, I won a fellowship for a foundation called LABA, which is a foundation dedicated to, giving artists of different disciplines a year to study the old scriptures. And it was in a non-religious way, but it was an extraordinary experience to walk through these myths, these stories that had enormous resonance about being human. And also at the end of the fellowship, we were invited to do a work that had a relationship with some of the stories. And so it seemed to me natural to think about flooding. And I was able to, because of their support, do a work which I had been thinking about for a while, which was flooding the sidewalk of 14th Street, which is one of the arteries that connect the Hudson River with the East River, with fish, so that people would walk on fish, which would be startling, which would make you think about these very, very visceral canals that you never think about, streams under the surface of New York. And so it started that way. And then the hurricane happened, Hurricane Sandy, and so it was very prescient, and I was then invited by the New Museum Idea City and a curatorial group, the They Company, to do a work in the area that was affected by the hurricane, projected outdoors on a wall of St. Patrick's Basilica, and it's an interior immersive video with the fish. Because of the work that I do as an artist in the public, where I really want to do work that's more and more interactive, I kept thinking what to do after this. And so this work here now is part of what I believe will be a larger project or trajectory that will include much more collaboration with scientists, and where I hope conceptually that this becomes a vehicle for scientists to be able to point people to more information about what's happening. So in its next iteration, I'm hoping that will be the case.
So how important to you is it that your work works on more than just the visual level?
It's always been important to me as an artist, and in a way, perhaps this is my first piece that I'm not holding back from making something beautiful. And I've done it deliberately in a way to seduce people into really feeling healed by the image, and once they've been brought into it, learning about really our planet and our particular relationship to the oceans.
Does it work on other levels as well, maybe? I mean, with the fish moving in circles and other aspects of life?
Yes, well, that's a great question, thank you. Because I don't even know how conscious it was for me, but when I actually did this work for Copenhagen and had this huge task of women in the third world and climate change, which you can't really do as a commission of 4 months on a very teeny budget, I kept thinking, how am I going to do this? And I used the circle a lot symbolically, both for woman and for planet. And so that was repeated in it. And so I think that probably has come through in this work by having the school of fish ultimately become circular in it.
Can you talk a bit about the process of making Watershed and how you actually filmed the fish and then got from there to them being digitised like this and displayed here on the National Theatre?
I actually am a painter and a sculptor, and I work in a variety of mediums. I'm not really taught to be a video artist, though I've started to use video in the last, I guess, 7 years. And I love it because it's a medium for me that actually does incorporate and embrace painting and sculpture and, in a way, architecture. So as far as the medium, that's why I choose to use it. In this particular piece, I actually traveled to Colombia, South America to film the piraku fish because they're an Amazonian fish that were almost extinct and are now brought back to life in a really important part of the South American food chain, actually. And in New York, when it had its smaller presentation, so to speak, I used carp. And that was very interesting to me also because carp is such a paradoxical fish. It's both considered an invasive species these days, particularly in America, where it was a particular species of it has been brought over and are eating and taking over the Illinois River and into the Great Lakes. But of course, in Asia, it's considered good luck. And in Eastern Europe, it's a bottom feeder that is a very basic food. So I'm interested in using fish for their multi-purpose characteristics.
I mean, you've mentioned that it's already been shown in Lower Manhattan
On a very small scale.
on the wall of St. Patrick's Basilica. How much did you modify it before bringing it here?
Oh, this is completely different. Those were my carp, and this is the Colombian fish. Yeah, and this is much brighter because when I learned that the Totally Thames, Adrian Evans, invited me to do this work, and at this site I really felt that it needed to have the color really saturated so that it could be seen at a great distance.
And do you think that the connotations attached to it here are going to be understood in a different way than in New York?
Well, funny you should ask. I just learned that fishing is the #1 sport of the UK. I never knew that. So I think that besides my interest in letting people think about the relationship of the Thames to the ocean and England and London's long history of relationship with that, I think also fish has a certain resonance here that I wasn't even aware of until now. So I'm hoping that there is that layer too.
And you've mentioned that you hope that it'll be part of a much larger scale project in New York. Where else would you like to see it travel to?
I'd like for this to go to waterfront cities throughout the world, and at each juncture, so to speak, I would like to be able to work with, site-specifically, with the scientists of the region. I would love for this to go to Australia, where I also am a citizen and feel that it would be very interesting for the harbor there, and certainly any other river city in the world. I'm thinking of Miami right now because the city apparently is going to go underwater very soon, and so I would like actually for this work, as I said before, to be a vehicle of communication, literally like a moving image billboard that makes people aware of where they are and what's happening right now in particular. So.